Thank you for joining us today. I'm Ari Chukral, JINSA's Associate Director of Foreign Policy. Iran's unprecedented attack on Israel in April 2024 of over 300 ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones marked one of the largest and most sophisticated aerial barrages in history. Just 6 months later, on October 1st, Iran launched a second massive attack involving 200 ballistic missiles, which U.S. and Israeli forces also defeated. These attacks, their defeat by a U.S.-led coalition, and their implication for the region's evolving air defense architecture are the focus of JINSA's new report, Forged Under Fire: Middle East Air Defense After Iran's 2024 Attacks on Israel. The report assesses the historic nature of the strikes, identifies key lessons learned, and outlines critical recommendations for advancing the region's integrated air and missile defense going forward. To discuss the report, I'm joined by former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Dan Shapiro, former Commander of U.S. Air Force's Central Command, Lieutenant General Joseph Gostella, and JINSA Randy and Charles Wax Senior Fellow, John Hanna. John and I co-authored the new JINSA report, and we look forward to discussing it today. As always, if you have any questions throughout the discussion, please submit them through Zoom. Before we get started, I want to first remind the audience what happened during Iran's unprecedented attacks against Israel in April and October of last year. Nolan, if you could please bring up the first map showing the April attack. Great, thank you. On April 13th to the 14th of last year, Iran launched approximately 170 drones, 110 to 130 medium-range ballistic missiles, and 30 land attack cruise missiles at Israel in its first direct attack against the Jewish state, whereas previously it had relied entirely upon its proxies attacking Israel. A smaller number of projectiles, including up to 100 short-range rockets, were also fired by Iranian proxy militias in Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen as well. Reports differ on the exact number of ballistic missiles that struck Israel, but it appears to have been less than 10 and perhaps as few as 4. This was in large part because CENTCOM formed an ad hoc multinational coalition, including Arab states, to defend Israel. In the days and even the hours leading up to the night of April 13th, CENTCOM Commander General Kurilla undertook an extraordinary campaign of diplomacy with several U.S. partners that saw not just the UK, France, and Germany join this coalition, but also Arab states, some of which have normalized relations with Israel, like Egypt and Jordan, as well as states that do not, specifically Saudi Arabia and Qatar. All of the drones and cruise missiles were intercepted. Of the approximately 110 to 130 ballistic missiles fired, half or more malfunctioned after launch or in flight, failing to reach Israel. Of the remainder, Israel's missile defenses intercepted the vast majority of them, and a smaller number were intercepted by U.S. Navy assets in the area. Following this unprecedented attack, Israel opted for a limited response to avoid escalation, launching a missile strike against Iran's S-300 air defense radar at Isfahan at a nuclear facility, while also not actually declaring that it had done so. Then 6 months later, on October 1st, Iran launched its second attack. This attack did not include any cruise missiles or drones, but it did include up to 200 ballistic missiles. Here we have a map of that attack showing the difference in the missile types. The U.S.-led coalition, according to conversations John and I had, was available in October. However, the fact that the attack involved only ballistic missiles limited the ability of the coalition members to participate in the air defense. So it was just the U.S. and Israel who were intercepting these ballistic missiles in this specific attack. Israel's air defense made most of the interceptions, But U.S. Anti-missile systems on ships also intercepted reportedly 6 missiles of a total of 12 that it tried to intercept. In October, around 35 missiles got through the U.S. and Israeli efforts. So a substantially larger number of missiles struck Israel in this attack. And as we get to the lessons learned later on, this is a key component of the fact that Iran learned from its first attack. Following this second attack, Israel launched a major retaliation in late October, targeting Iranian military and missile production facilities. In contrast to April, Israel openly took responsibility for this attack, signaling that it would not tolerate Iran launching these two unprecedented attacks against Israel. With that background out of the way, I want to get to the panel discussion. So John, I'll start with you. You led this report effort, which was the third of a trilogy of reports JINSA has done addressing integrated air and missile defense in the Middle East. These are obviously important cases, but it's not every attack that happens in the Middle East where we initiate a JINSA report about it. So what was the reasoning behind JINSA wanting to look at these case studies, and what were the main lessons and recommendations in the report?
Yeah, well, thank you, Ari. Thank you to Dan Shapiro and to General Gastella for agreeing to do this panel. They're both great friends and great Americans, and Dan in particular was absolutely crucial in his position at the Pentagon last year in helping get us through this. Well, really, were historic and unprecedented attacks in the long history of the Israeli-Iranian conflict. And I think that's the reason why, as soon as that April attack happened, we'd done a lot of work on air and missile defense. We'd documented progress that has been made on integrated air and missile defense in the Middle East since particularly Israel's entry into CENTCOM in the fall of 2021. There was important progress, but to our minds, what happened last April in particular with this coalition coming to Israel's defense was really a step function advancement, truly historic, and I'll say something about that. But and historic events in a unbelievably historic 20 months since October 7th, a period of time that really is just a blur because there are so many significant things happening on almost a week-by-week basis in the Middle East that it's very easy for any one of these events after they happen, that people move on to the next big thing that's happened, and they don't have the time to actually process and think about some of these really history-making and game-changing kinds of events. And so I think you and I already decided this was an important, given our past record looking at integrated air and missile defense in the Middle East, including a project 2 years ago that General Gastella was an integral part of. We decided, let's take the time. Let's really dive deep, spend some time thinking about these two attacks. What are their significance? What lessons can we draw from it? And what useful policy recommendations might there be for U.S. officials who are constantly drinking from the fire hose of the daily onslaught of the inbox and information that they're getting that might be useful to them to map out a slightly longer term strategy for building on this enormously important project and building it out of integrated air and missile defense, and really a new kind of way to think about the defense architecture of the Middle East through the rest of the 21st century, and this building partnership that we aspire to between our our best ally in the Middle East, Israel, and our best Arab partners in the Middle East. Let me just say a word about the two attacks and just two kind of big meta points about them that I think it's worthwhile, again, for people to stop and really absorb the history-making nature of these attacks. The first thing that's really striking is that this first attack in April of 2024 comes when we are already 6 months into the most brutal, destructive, and deadly Israeli-Palestinian war in history. By the time you get to April of 2024, we don't have any exact numbers, but you've probably got tens of thousands of Palestinian non-combatants already dead. You have average Arab citizens watching, Al Jazeera 24/7 on Arabic language social media 24/7, being fed a constant diet of real and legitimate Palestinian suffering, but without any of the broader context, usually about the horrific attacks of October 7th and obviously Hamas's strategy of running up as many Palestinian deaths as possible in order to bring international pressure on Israel. All they're seeing is a steady diet of images and narratives making them believe that, in fact, this far more powerful military force, the Israel Defense Forces, are perpetrating a genocide in Gaza. And it's in that environment that the United States has to come and try and rally an international coalition, including Arab partners and Arab leaders who, as much as most of them want to see Hamas defeated, they want to see the Muslim Brotherhood defeated, they want Israel to set back this important Iranian proxy force. They've also got their own populations that are increasingly angry at a fever pitch in terms of their anti-Israel sentiment that they've got to deal with and figure out a way through. And in my experience, doing Arab-Israeli things for the last several decades, in that environment, when they're facing those kinds of choices, Arab leaders have generally chosen the most cautious approach, which is simply to demur, to say it's too risky right now, we're just going to sit this one out. But instead, on that night, on April the 3rd, within the space of less than 2 weeks, General Kurilla and people like Dan and other U.S. officials in the Biden administration, in fact, rally, and they get not only several Arab states to agree to play a role in this coalition, but they even get the most important and influential and powerful Arab state, Saudi Arabia, obviously the home of the most important Islamic holy places, that doesn't have any relationship with Israel, to step up and play an important and significant role. It's an extraordinary moment in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict, I think, that for the first time you have Arab states actually participating in the defense of Israel, and again, coming right in the middle of that very, very controversial war in Gaza. I think it's really worth putting an exclamation point on that moment and just how important I think it was. The second thing that builds off of that is just in terms of this defense project that the U.S. has been working on for so many years, of trying to get our partners in the region to fully grasp the threat of the Iranian missile and drone project and to begin working more cooperatively together on a more integrated basis, that they could be more powerful acting collectively together, sharing information than they could just individually trying to manage the Iranian missile threat. A lot of period of time where not very much progress was made on that front. Since Israel's entry into CENTCOM and the Abraham Accords, I think you've seen increasing step-by-step cooperation. But again, on the night of April 13th, I don't think anybody could have anticipated what happened. A couple of specific examples is both Jordan and Saudi Arabia not only are sharing important information that they're receiving from their own radar and sensor capabilities for the Saudis. Some of that information is a lot closer to the Iranian border, and they're feeding that into CENTCOM, who's then able to take and develop a picture, then information that they're then sharing with other coalition partners, including the Israelis, to improve their ability to defend and intercept these Iranian projectiles. So they're doing that information sharing, but then they're going to the next level. They open up their airspace, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, to allow coalition air forces to fly in their territories and to start intercepting these 200 drones and cruise missiles that they all know are targeting Israel, but they allow this tremendous advantage of strategic depth and defending Israel, hundreds of kilometers beyond its own borders, rather than waiting for those projectiles to all descend on Israel kind of more or less simultaneously. These air forces are out in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, no doubt in parts of Syria and Iraq as well, defending against this Iranian onslaught. So that's a major step forward, opening their airspaces. And then finally, and this is still quite miraculous to me, that we know now that the Jordanians openly claimed it at the time. The Saudis didn't claim it, but both of them actually send up parts of their own air forces into their airspace, and they have their pilots actually engage in interceptions of Iranian projectiles that they know are targeting Israel. They don't necessarily pose a real and clear threat to Saudi or Jordanian assets, although that's their claim, of course, is that they're protecting their own sovereign airspace, and they would do this regardless of who these things were targeted at. But the fact that they go up there and they expend their own national assets in a combat situation, some of these missiles that they fire at these projectiles are very expensive, and they do that not directly in their own self-defense, but really they know in the defense of Israel, I think is just something that people like us who have worked on IAMD, the Integrated Air and Missile Defense, for a long time, really, I don't think anybody could have predicted. Anybody thought that was likely to happen anytime soon. In fact, we wrote a report with General Costello where we said, that's the ideal end state, where country A is not only just passively sharing important information digitally with country B, so country B can defend itself, but country A actually expending its own national assets to intercept threats that is headed for one of its neighbors. We said that's the ideal end state for integrated air and missile defense, but it's probably, let's be realistic, a long way off if we ever can get there. I think that's more or less a direct quote from one of the reports we wrote 2 years ago. And yet on that night of April 13th, in that crucible of that really massive real world crisis, some of this begins to happen, where you have Arab partners. Again, let me remind everybody, in the middle of an Israeli-Palestinian war of enormous suffering, Arab partners expending national defense assets to help defend Israel and taking steps with regard to integrated air and missile defense that nobody could have ever anticipated. Ari, there are lessons learned and recommendations that we can return to, but why don't you, with that framing, go ahead and move on to Ambassador Shapiro and General Costello with some questions to bring them in.
Yeah, thanks, John. There's a lot there, and certainly pieces that I want to pull apart and explore more throughout the the conversation. Ambassador Shapiro, first I'll open it up to you for anything that's been said that you want to comment on or about the report, but also as John said, you were in a key role handling the Middle East and the Pentagon when these attacks happened, and also, of course, in a unique position in that role of having been a former ambassador to Israel, a country involved in of course, defending itself. So from your unique vantage point, what's your impression of the significance of what happened, the U.S. role, and Arab participation in this coalition?
Sure. Thank you, Ari, and thanks, John, for the invitation. And really, I would just want to start by expressing my appreciation to JINSA for all the work it does on regional security. The series of reports that John referenced have been really quite influential to policymakers going back to an earlier phase of Israel entering into CENTCOM, and then the sort of vision of integrated air and missile defense before it became a reality. And so I want to thank JINSA, and then I really want to compliment John and Ari on the report itself, which is quite thorough, quite detailed, really captures what happened from the big picture into a lot of the details. Obviously, not everything emerges, from things that happened in some cases in very sensitive rooms, but there's no question that this report and the lessons learned is very, very on point and very relevant. And I say that as someone who was in some of those rooms. So let me just make a few observations, just a little bit about the events themselves, and then maybe a couple of other observations, and then I won't take too long so we can have more of a discussion. This, of course, all kicked off on April 1st when the Israelis informed us that they had just struck an IRGC commander, senior official in Damascus, maybe grazing the Iranian consulate or embassy. The Iranians chose to interpret that as an attack on sovereign Iranian territory. And so they began to make noise about how they were going to have to respond. Well, we know the history that Iran has always avoided direct confrontation either with the Israel or the US and preferred to use proxies and other kind of more deniable means to attack. So what became clear very quickly from their own statements and then from the intel was that they were actually planning a direct strike from Iran on Israel. But what we saw over the days from April 1st to April 13th was initially something that looked sort of small and modest and more in line with the kinds of things we had previously either trained for or learned to address. Small numbers of drones. There had already been many drones intercepted from the Houthis, from the Iraqi and Syrian militias, from others. Or a smaller number of missiles. When I was ambassador a decade ago, and Israel was still in EUCOM, there were drills on missile defense, generally focusing on missiles coming from Lebanon, a little bit from Iran. But the expectation, I think the report mentions this, was, we're talking about 1, 2, maybe 10 missiles. Nothing like the volume that we saw 2 weeks later when it was over 100 ballistic missiles, several dozen land attack cruise missiles, well over 150 UAVs. And so that was really quite dramatic, preparing for it in real time while seeing through intel and other sources the volume of this attack growing. No question, and I want to give extra foot stomp of credit to General Eric Kurilla, obviously his whole team in CENTCOM, but he personally was critical to building in real time this multi-layered, multi-vectored, multilateral defense architecture, and then executed by AFCENT especially, Gus's old outfit. It was the last week in the job of the previous AFCENT commander, General Alexis Grinkovich. He's now on the joint staff as the J3 and nominated to be the EUCOM commander. It's kind of a nice mic drop moment for an AFCENT commander. That several air forces, as was mentioned, from within the region, also several from without, the British and the French participated in addition to the US and Israel, and the Arab states that were mentioned, all integrated, all deconflicted, all chasing down these drones and LACMs. That is not something we had ever drilled. That was made up and invented on the fly in real time. Now, when the ballistic missiles were launched, and I was sitting in the Pentagon, and we were watching on our screens as the tracks of the missiles went across the region. Unlike the other two munitions that take hours to fly from Iran to Israel, those take minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. So I was there. Secretary Austin was sitting in the Situation Room with the president and most of the cabinet, watching the same thing. And once those missiles were aloft, it got very quiet and it was very tense. And that was the moment of truth when we were going to learn whether what we have drilled and all those years of investing in missile defense technology and joint training and building relationships, whether that was going to come to fruition. And of course, you know the result, the vast majority of those missiles, the ones that made it into Israeli airspace, were intercepted. There was very, very limited damage. And it was really historic what was achieved in that several hours of defense. Nothing like that had ever happened either in terms of the attack, and certainly nothing like that in terms of the multilateral defense. So just a couple of thoughts about that. I can go into more details if people are interested, but you know, that ad hoc nature of the multilateral counter drone and counter LACM effort with the air forces really was caused by the fact that we had never planned for that, and had really the Iranians really exceeded, I think, what anyone expected they would try. And so fortunately we had time. We had, you know, 2 to 3 weeks, or 2 weeks, I guess, just under, to put all that together. But that was not obvious that we would have that. The October strike was a little different because after 2 other Israeli actions, the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and the strike against Fuad Shukr in Beirut the same night at the end of July, and the Iranians made clear that they were preparing a response, and then they kept their missile forces on alert so that we knew that they'd be able to respond in a much shorter timeline. We wouldn't necessarily have the 10 days or 2 weeks to prepare from any given point. The U.S. surged additional capabilities into the region, just as we had in April when we had a little time, and kept them there. And they were still there and still in place in October, on October 1st, when Iran ultimately, with very little notice, did launch the second strike. Again, this time with twice the number of ballistic missiles and none of the other munitions, but we were able, together with Israel, to largely defeat that attack. I should say largely, because there are some lessons learned here about where some things got through, in part, as the report points out, because Israel made choices about what were the priority targets to defend, mostly civilian and some other very sensitive sites, and to allow some missiles to go through. Those are agonizing choices, but partly because the systems, both the Arrow and the U.S. systems in the naval vessels offshore, were successful, but there's always room to improve. I'll put it that way. And so there's a lot of learning that is going on in the Israeli air defense and on the U.S. side, ballistic missile defense as well, to try to make sure that if ever called upon, we have even better performance. Finally, I'll just say that the observations John was making about the Arab views on this, I think, are exactly right. The Arab states really defined a common interest of their own, defending their own sovereign airspace. That may have been the explanation, but it's true, of course. But to ensure that Iran was not successful in a major strike on Israel, which could, of course, produced a much wider regional war. So partly their own interest to protect themselves, partly to try to prevent escalatory scenarios. And so they really, in real time, bought into this and subsequently leaned into it even more. A month after the attack on April, so it was May, I had already scheduled, and it was on the calendar already, working groups with the GCC partners on integrated air and missile defense and on maritime security. And when we got there, all of the delegations from the GCC militaries had been significantly upgraded. The most senior members of their planning and operations teams showed up. They really wanted to lean in and learn more about what had just happened. It was really the proof of concept of integrated air and missile defense, something that's been talked about, written about, and in elements had been built, but had never been tested in real time. And they saw the value, and they wanted to understand more how they could contribute, how they could benefit from it. That was, I think, a very, very telling reaction that they saw the real value. Part of the value we conveyed to them, of course, would be increased not only by their own participation, but by their own breaking down of their own barriers. Even sometimes it's the intra-Arab mistrust or lack of connectivity that poses some limits. There may be even more trust with Israelis in some case than between Arabs. But the notion that they all had to step up to sign the kinds of agreements and then implement them that would allow the sharing of information at the speed of data, not through analog phone lines, so that when somebody sees something in the air, they share it with all their partners. That's the common operating picture that really is the nuts and bolts of an integrated air and missile defense. So we really, I think, have a lot of opportunity to build on this. Again, 2 big wins, but as much as it is worth celebrating what was achieved in those big wins, it also points to how much more we need to do to really maximize the opportunity here. That's going to be getting back into joint exercises, probably not until the war is over. The Israeli tempo is down, and the political heat is down for Arab militaries to engage in that, to get those information sharing agreements signed and implemented, to continue to break down those intra-Arab blockages, so that we're not operating as a hub and spokes with everything coming through the U.S., but flowing from one partner to another in the region. Again, lots more to say about all of these elements, but I just wanted to offer a few personal reflections and those comments, and again, offer my compliments on an excellent report.
Thank you. You tell a remarkable story about what happened, and I think it's something that we certainly outlined in the report, that none of this was possible without U.S. leadership, and I think it's a testament to you, other Biden administration officials, certainly CENTCOM as well, and making this possible. General Gastella, you were part of the first IAMD report that JINSA published in May 2023. In that report, we talked about the important progress that had been made that John outlined for air defense cooperation, but really emphasized the need for this step-by-step approach. Don't be too ambitious. We want to make sure everyone's on board. As John and Ambassador Shapiro outlined, the preparations at that time were really for 1 or a few drones. If people go look at that report, build it and they will come, they'll see we have a map that shows 1 drone going up the Red Sea, which is what many people told us was really the drill that CENTCOM was preparing for. In comparison, the comparison between that and what our new report has in April and October is stark. So, General Gastella, what are your impressions of JINSA's new report? Anything that's previously been said on the webinar, and as well as the evolution of IAMD in the region, having been AFCENT commander, trying to push this initiative forward?
No, thank you. And to echo what the ambassador said, phenomenal job with the report. You and John did a great job with this, and it's worth every bit time to read the thing. At least read the executive summary. Look at the pictures. It is really a fantastic piece of work. And no, and the other thing is, a huge congrats to the the coalition team that helped defend against this. It's amazing militarily what was done here, and I commend the U.S. leadership involved in it, as well as mainly bringing the allies and partners together for a common goal of defense of Israel, and then the execution of it, by the way, which had not been practiced at all, certainly not to this scale. And so a couple reflections, and that is, you're right. Years ago, no one would have imagined something like this. But as the Arab partners watched the onslaught that Israel has been suffering, some of it coming from Yemen, from directly from north of them, the 360 threat. I think that many of the Gulf countries go, hey, this could be happening to us. And so there's nothing like seeing a common picture to enable a common action. And so that as unfortunate as the Israeli situation is that it has galvanized the region to really the imperative of coming together. And it would have been a lot harder to do any of this without that. And so I'm just sharing something that's not a good thing, but it's one positive aspect of the fight of the event since October 20 months ago. As was mentioned, the criticality of integration of air and missile defense, defense of one's homeland, it could be the United States, it could be any country in the world, starts far, far, far away from your borders. And it starts with an understanding of what the threats are. And certainly if you have the benefit of early warning, that gives you that decision time, that gives you time to array your forces. What no country can do is sit in like we call it militarily, a 3-point stance, where you're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting all the time for something to come. So the indications and warnings that were shared allowed the preparation to occur, and obviously the success that the coalition had. Nobody's patting themselves on the back over there. I was over there about actually December of this last year, and discussed with my replacements and the KOC team there about it. And they did some great work, but at the same time, they're not letting their guard down. This needs to continue to improve for the sake of everyone's safety. And and the other thing is, like, it's an evolving threat and a very quick learning adversary. We never would we have predicted that the volume of fires would have come at us. The fact that it's what I call a complex attack, where you have low altitude, slow moving drones interleaved with high speed cruise missiles, all very low, combined with the over the top ballistic missile attacks. That's an overwhelming, what was sent at Israel was overwhelming by any standards in history. And for it to be handled as well as it is just astonishing. The things, though, that also strike me is that we're a little bit on the wrong side of the cost equation. Developing those threats is inexpensive. Defeating them is very expensive. When you have, in case of the fighters that were shooting down some of the cruise missiles, you're shooting multi-million-dollar missiles at things that are very inexpensive to make. That is not a good place for us to be in. We can do it maybe as the United States, but can our allies and partners, do they have the WRM, the war resource materials, to expend their treasure on these low-cost threats? And so there is an imperative of more affordable ways of interdicting these things. That's true for that low-altitude stuff that we talked about, the drones and the cruise missiles, but it's also true for the ballistic missiles. And it's interesting that while not all of them were engaged, as we've learned in advanced warfare, not everything should be engaged, right? If a missile is going to go to an open field, it sucks. I hope there's nobody in the field, but you may want to let it go, because that Patriot, that Arrow 3, that SM-3 may be better if it's saved for what's coming next. And so these are very complex and very important decisions that air and missile defense leadership, the leadership, needs to make as we see this type of threat evolve. The other piece to this, and that is, I call it, like, if there was one person that was the king of the region, right, that could mandate anything, they would mandate the speed of light, information sharing, common picture, everyone's sensor feeds together, and that would create a situation where everyone knows exactly at the speed of light what's happening. And you would employ someone at the leading edge of the battle space. If they had a shot against something, you would have them take it, even though it may not be coming at their country. Well, that's no one's king of the region, right? But what we saw here is some tremendous cooperation where, as was mentioned, it would be unheard of in the past to give up your airspace so someone else could fly in it. That wasn't happening. It would be unheard of in the past to shoot your treasure, your missiles, your air-to-air engagement means at a target that is not coming at your country, because that's one less offensive weapon that you have. to engage and protect yourselves. And so some really tremendously interesting and positive developments that came out of this, but there's certainly a long way the region could still go. The technology on some of those low altitude things is going to do nothing but improve, and the same with the technology of the ballistic missiles. It will do nothing but improve, and so it's imperative that we continue to integrate. And I guess one last thing is, like, when I was over there, I talked to the defense attachés in a couple of the regions, and I go, "Hey, it sounds like you're coming together multilaterally." He's like, "No, Gus, you know what we're really doing? There's multiple bilats where, as the ambassador said, a lot of the countries, they are willing to cooperate with the United States, but they're not necessarily going to share with everyone else." And so what we have is the U.S. being the focal point, the center point, where everyone's so far been willing to share with us. And then the U.S. can then disseminate a picture that everyone can benefit from. In a way, it protects sovereignty, because you don't know whose radar data is contributing to that picture. It's kind of removed. It's just a common picture they can use. And that way, it gets across some of the cultural barriers or political barriers of cooperation. But sharing data now is more important than putting troops in someone else's country. It's that critical. And so no, it's exciting to see how this. I'm very happy to see the success that was had by the team there. But there's a ways to go. And I'll share one more thing, a war story. One of the young guys that was out there in an F-16, which is a single seat fighter, at night had shot his air-to-air missiles. I think he was carrying 6 of them, let's say. He'd shot all of those. So all he had left was the gun, right? And by the way, these missiles are coming in very low altitude. I mean, we're talking a couple 100 feet off the ground. And there was one more that he had to get, and he elected to kind of descend down. And by the way, this is blackness, dark desert, no lights, no nothing. Descend down in the darkness and shoot this thing with the gun, basically relying on his instruments, flying only a couple 100 feet off the ground without any form of, and they came back and they're studying it and they're asking me questions. He goes, "What I would recommend is no one ever doing that again," because he almost killed himself trying to shoot these things down. And it's a very difficult situation. So it gets back to the technology that we need to fight it. So anyway, I'll stop there, but I really appreciate the opportunity to pitch in on the discussion.
Wow, that's an incredible story, and certainly a lot of lessons that we outlined in the report, but also just tactical lessons apparently for fighting in the air. Ambassador Shapiro, want to bring you back in. We talked about the response, the Israeli response after obviously the U.S. deployed just a key amount of assets, a critical amount of assets to in anticipation of the attacks to help defend Israel. Wondering if you could comment on how the Biden administration's response maybe differed after each of the attacks, how it approached. Obviously you had in April this unprecedented attack that wasn't anticipated. By October, Iran had attacked before. And what do you think these attacks mean for deterrence by denial versus deterrence by punishment against the Iranians?
Yeah, these are really good questions. Again, we were, context, and John laid it, which was the fact that the war in Gaza had already been going on for about 6 months at that point in the April attack. And, from the very beginning, in addition to supporting Israel's ability to defend itself and defeat Hamas and get hostages released, which was always central to the Biden administration's response, the administration also sought very consistently to try to prevent a widening of the war and an escalation of the war in multiple directions. And that was not only because of the bad things that could happen to the region, but the bad things that could happen to our forces. We had surged a significant number of forces into the region after October 7th. That was when President Biden made the famous comment, "Don't." And of course, we had vessels, and all their crews. We had air crews. We had air defense assets. There was a lot there. And so a wider war increases the chances that we are pulled into that wider war as well. So that was something that we sought to avoid. Now, of course, the don't, which did work in November and December against Hezbollah and Iran, it obviously didn't work in April because by then Iran did. They didn't don't. And so the fact that it was the first time we had ever seen Iran do a state-to-state attack like that against Israel obviously was a shattering of a taboo and meant that that had to be considered very carefully. But because of the effectiveness of defeating the attack in the ways we've been describing, that did lead President Biden thinking about avoiding the escalation and the broadening of the war to counsel Prime Minister Netanyahu, as I think is well known, was reported at the time, to take the win. And not to, at that point anyway, go back immediately to a response. Israel, quite understandably, felt that there needed to be some response, and they came up with a very precise, very targeted, very limited response. It's covered in the report, but an air-launched ballistic missile against a specific air defense radar, demonstrating reach, demonstrating accuracy, demonstrating that there's a lot more that Iran needed to worry about if it found itself in a series of exchanges with Israel. And then that was that. When the second attack occurred, again, there was a big buildup to it, bigger and longer buildup because it followed the two Israeli strikes in late July. And from the, immediately Iran said, well, we're going to have to respond to that. And then we waited through August and September. And during September, we were watching Israel sort of decimate Hezbollah, first with the pagers and the walkie-talkies, then taking out strategic weapons and taking out Nasrallah and most of the leaders. And so there was a much longer buildup to it. And then when the Iranians attacked that time, and this time with double the number of ballistic missiles, and some of them did get through, at that point, a year into this war, the second time this major taboo had been broken, it's no longer a taboo, I guess, at that point, there was no disagreement between Israel and the United States that Israel was going to have to respond in a much more fulsome way than it did in April. Then the question, again, thinking about how to shape and scope that response such that it provided serious punishment and serious deterrent value for future strikes, but also destroying key assets without getting into the multiple rounds and multiple escalatory scenarios. That was the dialogue that took place first at a political level between the president and the prime minister and their top aides, and steered Israel away from hitting certain sites like nuclear sites, like leadership targets, like major energy infrastructure, and toward what they ultimately hit, which were the strategic air defense radars, the batteries, the S-300s, and the missile defense production capabilities, and then a few other things, a site deemed to have been likely involved in some weaponization research and one or two other things. To do that kind of a strike, which involved, I think, over 100 Israeli aircraft in the air on that night of October 25th, 26th, flying in airspace that CENTCOM is present in, Syrian airspace, Iraqi airspace, Jordanian airspace. It requires a certain degree of minimum of deconfliction. Ultimately, I'd say it's more than deconfliction. It's a kind of coordination. This was an Israeli strike. The United States did not directly participate in the strike. Nevertheless, that is not something that could have been done or anybody tried to do without U.S. knowledge, awareness, the ability to support or at least provide contingency support in certain scenarios. And, while we carefully monitored the Israeli strike throughout the night, there was no effort to prevent us from doing so. There was every effort because of the trust that had been built up between the IDF and CENTCOM to make sure everything was visible and everything was known. Here I have to say, again, Israel's entry into CENTCOM was a critical move in 2020-21 after the Abraham Accords, and JINSA was among the visionaries about that move. But it's one thing to come into CENTCOM. It's another thing to build the deep, intimate, trusting relationships that now progressive, successive CENTCOM leadership have done with their IDF counterparts, and the more so in the crucible of this terrible war. The kinds of conversations and the kinds of trust that were taking place literally daily basis, sometimes multiple times daily basis, between General Kurilla and General Halevi, between all of their component commanders and their counterparts, really down through the ranks, is an important part of this story. It means that Israel knows that if it has to take certain kinds of action, and it's all done in this kind of coordinated and deconflicted way, it has that extra degree of confidence of what it can do and what support it will have if it needs it. So that was a big shift from the first attack to the second attack. How to respond? There was not sufficient deterrence, obviously, from the first attack in terms of the response, because Iran did it a second time. Much greater, I think, deterrence established through the second, but that was carefully scoped in order to try to prevent it from producing a third and a fourth and a fifth round, so that we could get on with what we wanted very much to do, which was try to bring the war to an end with the hostages released and with Hamas removed from power, but without some other major front continuing to heat up.
General Gostella, since we are running close to the end of our time, I'm going to pack a few questions together and leave it to you how you'd like to approach them. But how do you think what has occurred, not just the air defense in April and October, but really throughout the war, what lessons do you draw from that in terms of what could be applied potentially to President Trump's Golden Dome plan? Or are there any lessons from what happened in April and October that would benefit Ukraine, or lessons you've seen from from Ukraine that you think could be applied to Middle East air defense?
No, thank you. There's a lot that we need to learn these lessons. We're seeing these things, but I just hope we're internalizing and learning them from them. One thing I feel, and I honestly feel this, and I feel like on the U.S. side, if you look at the Ukraine-Russia situation, we are one catastrophe away from an outrageous realization that our preparedness is not where it should be for these low-end drone type systems. Our airports, our bases, our critical infrastructure, we have stuff, but we're toying with what we're going to need to really get after it. The Golden Dome is even a broader effort to truly provide that real protection against the most lethal threats, which are the ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Those are the most damage-inducing ones. But the low-end stuff that we're seeing in Ukraine is unbelievable in terms of its effectiveness if you can't counter it. And it's inexpensive and it's incredibly effective. We're going to take out multiple bombers that are sitting in the open like that. That scares me, and I know that we need to rapidly get after it as a nation. So it's a two-prong. We need to. Golden Dome clearly is been stated as a level of aspiration from this administration, which would be very costly, but it certainly will be a deterrent. But we also need to get after the low end stuff, and not just in the homeland, but our forward deployed. Or we have a lot of attack surface forward, meaning there's vulnerabilities. Our embassies, our bases. There may be a beautiful Patriot sitting there, but can we really defend against an onslaught that we just saw go at Israel if it came at one of our facilities? And I don't think we're as prepared as we should be. And so, but I think we now finally have the legitimacy to truly bring that region together with a speed of light, interconnectivity, and a common operating picture, and a picture that not just a picture, but it's an actionable picture where it's exquisite data that's good enough to actually engage against it, and so that you're actually managing your own defensive arsenals in a way that's sustainable over time. And I guess the last thing to think about is, back to Israel, Israel only has short windows of legitimacy in the international eye. It happens very rarely. It happened right after the initial attacks on October 7th. They had the world sympathy, and I think they had it again when all these attacks came at them. I think it's important that we follow through on those and make the most out of them, right? And there's always what I worry about in that region is that we're self-deterring. We don't want to escalate, but at the same time, I know one thing about Iran: they respect force and they respect U.S. posture. And if we're there with a posture and Israel is allowed to prosecute what is a legitimate threat to their nation and their livelihood, I think they should be able to prosecute it. Same with the Houthis. We haven't talked about that. The threats that have been emanating in Yemen are finally being gotten after now. We've been avoiding those, but now we're getting after it. The very things that we condemned the kingdom about years ago in the Saudi-led coalition, or in an amazing turn of events, we're actually doing it down there now. And so there's a lot to unpack with that, but some phenomenal lessons in Russia and Ukraine, and as well as Israel here, that we need to take advantage of and start figuring out how to affordably counter those things.
John, I'll turn to you. One for any comments you'd like to make on what's been discussed so far, as well as any further lessons learned you'd like to add, or comments on the recommendations that we proposed in our report.
Yeah, let me just highlight a few things, and it's been a terrific discussion. One, just to pick up on what Dan said, which is a big lesson from our report, is that as successful as these defenses of Israel were in the coalition, it was very much an ad hoc affair built on the fly. We don't want to be in a position, ideally, where we're having to reinvent the coalition wheel every time there's a major crisis. We don't want to have to depend on a single charismatic, aggressive, totally determined CENTCOM commander. As lucky as we were to have Kurilla there, ideally in these kinds of complicated military contingencies, you'd like some kind of structure to already be in place that you can kind of flip the switch and there's a standard operating procedure and everybody knows what they're going to do. That's what we want to build, and that's what our recommendations are oriented to how do we take these successes and now do whatever we can to undergird them, to institutionalize them, with agreements, with understandings, with the right kind of training that would allow this to become something that we can actually begin to depend on going forward in the region. A second thing that Dan mentioned was just the importance of this U.S. surge of capability into CENTCOM's AOR, and they're able to help Israel defend itself from these massive attacks. And the fact is, we had time in both of these attacks to be able to have to get that capability to the region. As we've said, Iran is a learning entity. It no doubt now knows that surprise and stealth the next time could end up doing a lot more damage if the U.S. doesn't have that time to prepare the coalition and to surge its forces. So I think that's at least something worth thinking about. Are we structured properly in terms of our forward deployment into the CENTCOM AOR? Do they have enough assets there to be able to draw on if the balloon goes up tonight and the Iranians decide they want to take another major shot at Israel or one of our other partners in the region? I don't anticipate, given the trajectory on our defense budget, which isn't very encouraging, that we're going to make progress on that anytime soon. But I think it's worth CENTCOM and other people in the Pentagon seriously looking at and talking to our senior officials about the U.S. force posture in the CENTCOM AOR. I do think, it's important that CENTCOM really take the time, hopefully it's done so, to learn some of the lessons that we talk about in our report, that they do their own lessons learned, and that they then socialize that throughout the rest of the Trump administration about what happened in those attacks, what opportunities, tremendous opportunities they've created going forward that we ought to be thinking about how do we take advantage of, and what are the kinds of resources and capabilities and policies that you'll need to be pursuing as a national government comprehensively to try and really build out this very promising project of integrated air and missile defense. Let me just a couple of final items. One, again, as successful as these things were, particularly in October, with those, when Iran doubled up on the number of ballistic missiles, it was a near run thing for Israel. The Arrow, as successful as it was, there weren't enough of them. It was nearly overwhelmed. By doubling up the number of ballistic missiles, Iran increased the number of successful hits by, a factor of maybe 6, 7, 8. I don't know what it was, between 30 and 40 of these things hit. Luckily, in some ways, the Iranians were targeting primarily military and intelligence sites. But if they had shot not 200 next time, but if they shoot 300 or 400 of these things within the course of an hour or so at population centers, at critical infrastructure sites, is Israel capable of defeating that? I think probably there's a big question mark on that. Dan and the Biden administration, between the October attack by Iran and Israel's response, an Israeli request was, we need more help, send us a THAAD battery, and the administration rushed it there. Just in case Iran was going to try and take a third shot at Israel. Luckily, it didn't, but we now have that THAAD capability in Israel with American soldiers, almost 100 of them on the ground, helping to defend Israel. But I think, Congress allocates half $500 million a year to Israel's air and missile defense, including some to the Arrow. But I think, we've seen that Israel's long-range capabilities are really under stress, and we ought to look at that budget for the Arrow over the long term and other possible solutions that are less expensive than Arrow for Israel's long-range defense and the defense of any of our Arab partners as well. There were also shortcomings in Arab capabilities, as you talked about, Ari. Clearly, they were able to participate much more actively in that April attack, when it ended up only being ballistic missiles flying from Iran toward Israel. They really didn't have anything that they could dramatically contribute to that. Maybe some radar tracking, I don't know. But in terms of active defense and interceptions, they just don't have the systems in place, the architecture in place to really contribute to the defense of Israel in that situation. And I think one thing the U.S. government has got to look at is, what are those additional capabilities our Arab friends may need that would be good for them and their own sovereign defense, but also allow them, as part of this broader architecture that we're hoping to build out, that they can really be active participants in the broader defense of their neighborhood. Some of that will require a lot of reform in the way we do foreign military sales and foreign military financing. The Trump administration has got an executive order on the need to reform that process. But I think, to the extent that Arab governments are now prepared to participate in a broader regional coalition to help defend not only themselves, but some of their neighbors, and they're actively committed to that, I think we ought to get them on a priority list and get some of these air defense capabilities on a priority list to get it to them, if that's what CENTCOM thinks is necessary to build out this architecture and to expedite that process. And then just finally, I'll close it out. I'm sorry I've gone on so long. Was this question of, if we were going to stress test the system of this emerging IAMD architecture that we've got, as difficult as this challenge was, Israel was the best test case. Israel is the farthest away from Iran. Israel's got the best national multi-tiered air defense system probably in the world, more experienced than anybody, and it's got the best relationship with the United States. So the thought that the United States would likely pick up and come to Israel's defense to help it out was pretty certain or likely in the case of Israel. I think some of our Arab partners, as impressed as they were, how much they want to learn from this, probably in the back of their minds are thinking, yeah, that's great for Israel, but we're a lot closer to the Iranian problem. We don't have nearly the experience or capabilities of the Israelis, and we're not always certain the United States is going to be able to rally the cavalry to come to our defense if we're faced with the same kind of situation as Israel was last April and October. And I think that's an issue that we've really got to work on with our Arab partners, make sure that those relationships are as strong as they can be, that we're staying engaged in the Middle East, continuing to lead, letting our partners know we got their backs through a whole variety of things we can do with them, and to make sure that they know that what happened in April and October is not something unique to Israel and Israel's defense, but something that we want to make the standard for our ability to help and protect and secure our partners around this region who are prepared to really go all in on this really critical common defense project. So I'll leave it there. I've gone on long, but thank you for letting me get those points in, Ari. Thanks a lot, and thanks to Dan and to Gus for joining us today.
Thank you,
Well,
John.
there's much more to talk about, but we're over time. So I want to thank our audience and our panel for joining us today. You can find JINSA's report, Forged Under Fire, on our website, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.